Hi, this is Kathleen Parker, member of Group 5, and this is our New York Feasibility Study. We're going to begin our presentation with a brief overview of the New York market. There are three major demand generators within our submarket that we want to focus on. One being LaGuardia Airport, which is seasonally, people come all year round. It is a major airport in our submarket. People come in and out every day of the week. There's no seasonality there. Another major generator within our market is Citi Field. It is seasonal from spring to fall, so April to October. It is a baseball stadium, home of the New York Mets of Major League Baseball, and most days of the week they will have games there. The third major generator within our market is the USTA National Tennis Center. That is home to the U.S. Tennis Open, a major tennis tournament held every year. It starts in late August and ends in mid-September, and the finals happen primarily on the weekends. Our next slide is about estimated market supply. As we can see from these slides, supply has increased year over year. Now there are approximately 45,000 rooms as of 2019, and it has constantly gone up. Diving further, we can see that the only decrease in supply and number of rooms was between 2005, 2006, 2007, and it has since increased to its almost 45,000 as of 2019. Here we can see that the most number of hotels are scheduled to open in 2020 with nearly 70 hotels, and it fluctuates almost yearly, and only one hotel is scheduled to open in 2025, although that will most likely change as more hotels are planned for opening. And following the trends of the number of rooms, we can see that 2020 has nearly 9,000 hotel rooms opening. It decreases significantly in 2021, and there are only about 88 rooms scheduled to open in 2025 in that one hotel. So our proposed hotel is a Moxie Hotel, which is part of the Marriott family. There are primarily hotels overseas in Europe and Asia, but there are also locations throughout the United States. It's an upper mid-scale hotel, and we decided to do 130 rooms. We based that number off of the average number of rooms within our submarket in Queens. We decided to have a meeting space because all but one of our comparable hotels had a meeting space available. And we also decided to have a restaurant because we wanted to provide a dining option to our guests, and 3 of our comparable hotels had restaurants while 2 did not. So we decided to look at 5 different hotels in our submarket that have comparable room sizes, and they're all upper mid-scale as well. The Holiday Inn Long Island City has the most number of rooms, while the Fairfield Inn Suites has the second most number of rooms around our same number. And now I'm going to turn it over to Nick to talk about forecasting.
All right, thank you, Kathleen. I am Nick Hipwell, taking over for the forecasting. We're going to start this portion with the 4 Ps. The 4 Ps being proximity, participation, pricing, and product. With proximity, all of our comparable hotels will be right within that East River, Queens and Brooklyn segment. For participation, every one of the hotels participates in both the daily and monthly star reports, and only Holiday Inn Long Island City, Manhattan View, and Wyndham Garden Hotel Long Island City were daily and monthly segment participants. Moving into pricing, all these ADRs were were pulled off of the TripAdvisor website. They range from the La Quinta Inn, which is the lowest at 128 for the ADR, and go up to $216 for the Fairfield Inn. Then moving into the product, all of the hotels have meeting space, but only the Long Island City, Manhattan View, and Wyndham Garden, Long Island have restaurants, as Kathleen mentioned earlier. So now diving into the forecast summary for the New York market. And then moving into the forecast chart for the annual outlook in New York. This is a much more comprehensive chart, again showing occupancy, ADR, RevPAR, supply, demand, revenue, as well as the average daily supply, broken down into both percent and percent changes for occupancy, US dollars and percent changes for ADR and RevPAR, rooms and percent changes for supply and demand, and then yeah, some of the highlights to take away from this. There are right around the years between 2018, 19, and 20, there was a lot of large jumps, both in the positive and negative, for occupancy and ADR. We suspect that this could be due to large changes in revenue between those years. For 2018, there was an 8% change, and then for 2020, there was a 17% forecasted change. So that could be for the large spikes in RevPAR. Moving on to the market forecast, the pipeline and events, the average supply changes. We are seeing another large spike in the forecasted supply change in 2020, and then those numbers begin to smooth out for years 2021 through 2024. Going into the pipeline properties themselves, there are a total of 840 properties in the pipeline, and that's another 150,000 rooms. As far as existing rooms are concerned, there's 125,000 in the existing phase, then drops down to 14,000 currently under construction, just under 5,000 for final planning, and about 4,500 in the planning phase. Some of the major events that are taking place in New York that are of note are the Lunar New Year Parade, the New York City Marathon, and of course the New Year's drop in Times Square. And moving on, these are just some 12-month moving averages with percent changes, data that we used to create the forecast, as well as weekday, weekend trend information, again, just used to create our regression analysis. And then day of the week analysis, again, just to help set our seasonality for our regression calculation. And our monthly segmentation data, once again, just to help us create our regression analysis and get as much of an accurate reading as possible. So all in all, with all of these calculations and estimates, we were able to create the regression calculation and apply to our occupancy, ADR, RevPAR, supply, demand, and revenue calculations. And now I will pass it on to Lulu for our budgeting segment.
Thank you, Nick. First, let's start with the budgeting method. As you can see here, we were using the 5 years moving average from the host report to get our percentage to sales. For this part, mostly the department revenue and expenses. And then with using the revenue minus the expenses, we're getting the departmental profit. Since we already have the forecasted revenue and the room number as well as the occupancy rate, we're able to have them into the dollar amount. Moving on. So as for undistributed operating expenses, we use the same method on most of the categories except for franchise fees and marketing. because we believe most of these categories should follow an industry average, but the marketing and franchise fee may vary from the different franchise and the style of the hotel. So since we're doing the Moxie Hotel, as the information provided by Marriott, we're using the franchise fee of 5.5% and the marketing fee of 3.75%. Move on to the base management fee. So the national range for this is between 2% to 3%. Since all expenses tend to be higher in the New York City, we decided to use 3.5% for our budget. And then in the section of selected fixed charges, we decided that we buy the land that our hotel is going to build on, so we are not paying our rent. So the rent turned out to be zero on our budget. And for the insurance, we're using the $200,000 as our annual insurance cost based on the industry average. After calculate the dollar amount back to the forecast revenue, we then got the ratio to sales of 3%. It also turned out to fall into the standard percentage of insurance cost to sales for this market segmentation, which is between 1.5% to 4.5%. And then now there's some highlights that we found for the budgeting. The highest department expenses would be the food and beverage department. The profit of this department remained negative for the budget years, and then with an average of 106% of the total revenue throughout all these 5 years. And then the rooms revenue is the one and only steady revenue generator for all departments, with the 81.6 average percentage ratio to sales. It is able to cover all the expenses of other departments as well. So moving on to the EBITDA. As you can see here, when we compare the dollar amount of EBITDA of each year, we find that there's a growth. For year from 2021 to 2020, the growth rate is 16.1%, which is the highest throughout the years, and then stabilized to 14.5% afterwards. So now I'm gonna pass on to Kim for the capital budgeting.
Thank you, Lulu, and good evening. So in terms of the capital budget, I've broken this down into about 4 different scenarios that I want to talk about. It comprises of the initial cash outlay, operating components of the capital budget, the non-operating components, and then finally our investment decision. So when we're talking about the initial cash outlay, it itself has 4 different components that we figured. There's the average hotel development costs that we've determined. There's a time value of money consideration. And then we have some modifying cost assumptions regarding the East River submarket and the size of our hotel. So in terms of the average hotel development costs, we used the hotel development survey provided to ascertain that the Moxie Hotel is a lifestyle or soft branded hotel, and as such, it has these numbers associated with it per room of development costs. So as you can see, the initial data that we had was calculated incorrectly, so I modified it somewhat. The time value money considerations, considering the data was for 2015-2016, I've increased it to be during the time that we plan on building our hotel. So our assumption is that if we make the investment decision as of 2020, we can build. So that's why I built it out to 2020. So, and that's at a cost increase of 5%, which was also what we determined in our research. So the modifying cost assumptions for the East River, obviously New York City is much more expensive to build. If anybody's been in New York City, they know that. And the East River we assumed would be slightly less than average at 35%. So we've increased the cost as a result of that. And then last but not least, per the size of our planned hotel at 130 rooms, we multiplied each per room cost by 130 to get the final figures that you see here, including the $75,000 franchise application fee. The total investment cash outlay totals $74,737,471. So next, we have our operating components of the capital budget. I'm going to talk about EBITDA, the corporate income tax, depreciation, and net operating cash flow. So EBITDA and tax, the EBITDA, basically how we figured that was we took the number from the budget and we multiplied that by 130, which for 2020 is $581,100 in EBITDA. So that's what we did for every year, of course. The corporate income tax, we determined there were three components, one being a federal corporate income tax at 21%. The state is 7.1%, and then the city corporate income tax is pretty complicated. I've attached that in the references, but I've determined it to be 10-ish. So the total was 38.1% for our corporate income tax. Depreciation, we used two methods, two things that we needed to capitalize our costs. Building, which was just above $46 million, we used a straight line method with a 40-year useful life, so the yearly expense was around 1.2 mil. The furniture, fixed, and equipment cost was about 6.4 mil. We used a double declining depreciation method, 5 years of macros, and we added both of those expenses for the duration of the project to find our total depreciation costs. And the cash flows, all we did was add net income to the depreciation expense to determine the cash flows. So when it comes to non-operating components of the capital budget, we have net working capital, furniture, fixed equipment, land, tax break on accounting loss, and terminal value of the hotel. So net working capital, we made the assumption that the full amount was returned to us at the end of the project. For fixed furniture and equipment, we sold that at book value at the end of the project. Not all of it was depreciated. And the land at the East River, we determined depreciated around 3.39%, and we sold that with the hotel. So we included a 3.39% increase. Also, the accounting loss incurred from the sale of the hotel. I have a journal entry in front of you. The loss on the hotel sale was $24 million, and as such, there was a cash savings on that loss of just right around $9.3 million. And the terminal value we based on cash flows at year 5 that continued in perpetuity through year 6 and onward. And as such, the market value of the hotel in year 5 was just over $16 million. In terms of the investment decision, we have a projected incremental cash flows, ROI, IRR, and then NPV, and then finally decision. So here you see our cash flows. Basically, it involves all the components that I just described. And we have a terminal. Our last year of cash flows was around 42 million. You see the initial cash outlay of around 75 million, and then these are all the cash flows per year due to operating expenses, or actually revenues. Then we have a return on investment in IRR. The ROI is negative every year because net income's negative. And then we have IRR, we found was negative 9.19%. So not the best. Net present value was negative as well at negative 42 million that we calculated. And since the NPV is less than 0 and IRR is less than our required rate of return at 0.08, we will not buy. Thank you very much for your time. God bless. Good night.